Hail champions, and welcome to my Nerd Forge. This is going to be episode 2 of the D&D lore tips and tricks, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about the character sheet. So, what is a character sheet? Most simply put, a character sheet is the piece of paper that is the lifeblood of your character in your D&D session. So all of your stats, your equipment, your attacks, your spells, inventory, everything is going to be recorded on that character sheet. And they do have a D&D 5e specific character sheet to use. Now when you look on the internet, you're going to find many different variations of sheets. People are going to have homebrew sheets. I'm going to discuss let's just call it the basic D&D 5e character sheet from Wizards of the Coast. Lo and behold, this is the D&D 5e official character sheet. Like I said, you're going to find many different variations of character sheets on the internet. However, this is pretty much standard, and any DM that's DMing a 5e session should accept this. So when we look at the top left, you're going to see character name. This is where you're going to name your character whatever you want. It's unique to your character. However, unless, with some certain rules, the DM generally will never allow you to rename your character. So make sure you choose a correct name that you love. Next to that, you're going to see class and level. This is where you're going to put your character's class and the level in that class. And yes, you can get into multi-classing with different levels, and we will get into that in a much later video. Next to that, you will see your character's background. This is where you're going to basically title whatever background you have, like hermits, acolyte, soldier, thief. That is where you're going to put that just for reference. Next to that, this is an easy one. It's your name. So whatever you want your fellow players or your DM to call you in real life, this is just to show that this is your character sheet. Next, below class and level, is race. This is your character's actual race. So like Dragonborn, Elf, Dwarf, Halfling, Human, etc. Some DMs may be adopting the term species instead of race. So if you hear species or race, they pretty much mean the same thing. Next to that is going to be your character's alignment. And like the rest of this, we are going to be delving deeper into alignment because alignment is an entire video on its own. Next, you have experience points. This is how many experience points your character currently has. There is a certain experience point start off for each level, and then once you hit a certain number of experience points, that's when your character officially levels up. There is in the player's handbook, I believe, it will actually show all of the brackets for experience points, but just make sure you ask your DM and he will let you know what to fill in there, or just leave it blank because you guys are just going to go by level. Now on to the main portion of the character sheet. You have your attributes all the way to the left over there. You have strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Now you might be asking yourself, what are all of these attributes? What do they do? How do I use them? Like I said, I will be going over in a different video pretty much the specifics on each attribute and exactly what it does, and I'll even give examples, like in-game examples of each attribute and each stat. But you have your strength score, your dexterity score, your constitution score, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. And then you also, in that little circle, you have your modifier. And your modifier is basically what you're going to add to the roll if you do like a strength check or an intelligence check, save, etc., etc. Next to that, you're going to see your proficiency bonus. Now, your proficiency bonus is a number that increases with your character level, not your class level, but your character level. And your character level, as it increases, you're going to become more, I shouldn't say more proficient, but you're going to be better in the things that you're proficient in. So the proficiency bonus might go from 3 to 4 to 5, etc., etc. There is a table that you can view for proficiency bonuses. When I do the video on all the attributes and the skills, I will do a side note on that table for what proficiency bonus, basically what number should go in there at what level. But the player's handbook does have all of that information, so make sure you keep that handy. Next, you have your saving throws. Your saving throws are pretty much going to help keep you alive. So let's say you're going through a dungeon and you spring a trap that you didn't see. The DM might ask you to roll a dexterity saving throw, and this is to essentially dodge out of the trap. Your dexterity saving throw, you add that number to your dice roll, and if you're proficient, you're going to fill in the little bubble next to that. But all of the skills have pretty much the same application. Same with, like a wisdom saving throw would be if someone's trying to cast the fear spell on you, you would roll a wisdom save to save against that fear effect or that fear spell. Next, you have the bread and butter of your character sheet. You have the skills portion. This is pretty much going to be the most used section in this entire character sheet and even the game. You use your skills role-playing during combat, but you have to understand something about Dungeons and Dragons is about 70-ish% is going to be role-playing, downtime, traveling. Only a small percentage of Dungeons and Dragons is actually combat. This is a role-playing story. Essentially, think of your dungeon master as the author. He wrote a book, but instead of just handing you the book and having you read it, he's actually allowing you to make a main character in that book and then play through the book and change it from what he originally wrote. This allows both you and them to essentially write that story. So in a book, there's not non-stop combat. There's going to be downtime. There's going to be role-playing. There's going to be romance. There's going to be crafting. There's going to be so much that builds to that story. These skills is what you use to build that story. So if you're preparing a campsite, you might want to, use your survival. If you're sneaking around the city because this is a hostile territory, you're going to be using stealth. If you're checking out a treasure chest that you found, you'd be rolling investigation. If you walk into an unknown room, you might be rolling perception. If you're trying to haggle down the merchant for a piece of bread, you're going to be using persuasion. So these skills are the bread and butter and the lifeblood of not only the game, but also your character sheet. Heading over to the center of the character sheet, you're going to notice armor class, initiative, speed, maximum and current hit points, temporary hit points, what is that, hit dice, and death saves? Yeah, death saves. We'll get into that. So starting with armor class, this is the number that the enemy needs to roll and calculate, and they have to hit that number or higher in order to even damage you or even think about hitting you. Next, you have initiative. This is how quick you act during combat. So at the beginning of combat, before anything starts, the DM is going to have everyone roll initiative. The DM will roll initiative for his monsters and his side of the encounter, and each player will roll initiative for their respective character. Initiative generally goes off of dexterity, however, it does get bonuses from equipment, from feats, spells, etc., etc. But let's say you have a +3 to your initiative. When you roll the die 20, you're going to add 3 to that roll, and that is basically going to be where you go in the initiative order. Next, you have speed. Your speed is essentially how fast you can move during combat, and it even sees how far you can travel outside of combat. So generally, your character speed is going to be 30 feet. Now, in each combat or each situation or encounter, each round is going to be 6 seconds in a combat encounter, which means you can move 30 feet within 6 seconds. Now, generally how it's gridded out on the battle map is each space, each block is 5 feet. So every time you move one block in either direction, you're using up 5 feet of your 30 feet total. Maximum and current hit points is pretty self-explanatory. You're going to calculate your character's maximum hit points. The class guide or the class sheet in the player's handbook is going to have all of that information on how you calculate hit points, but when we do our stats, I will get deeper into how you actually calculate hit points. But that's going to be your hit point maximum, and then underneath that is going to be your current hit points. Every time you hit or take damage, you're going to erase the current hit points and you're going to put the new calculated current hit points. So if it's not pretty much self-explanatory, you're going to need a pencil and not a pen for this character sheet, because you are going to be erasing a lot and recalculating and putting in new scores and new hit points. Underneath that, you're going to see temporary hit points. Temporary hit points are going to come from heals or buffs, boons, maybe even some equipment, higher end equipment, and essentially you're going to subtract every time a creature hits you or you take damage. You're going to subtract it from your temporary hit points first before you start subtracting it from your current hit points. Hit dice is essentially every class has a certain hit dice amount. So like barbarians get a D12, fighters get a D10, and that is going to be your hit die. Depending on what level you are, that's how many total hit dice you have. You use these hit dice to recover hit points during a short rest. You also use these hit die to calculate your new hit points after you level up. Next to the hit points, you're going to see death saves. So when a character hits 0 hit points, they essentially fall unconscious. You are now bleeding out. And it is up to Fate's hand to either you're going to stabilize or you're going to bleed out and you will die. Now, when you do hit 0 hit points, on each one of your turns, at the end of your turn, which you're unconscious, you can't do anything, you're going to roll a d20. On a 10 or a higher, you're going to mark off 1 success. On a 9 or lower, you will mark off 1 failure. Basically, whichever one fills up to 3 first, that's what happens. So if you fill up to 3 successes first before 3 failures, you stabilize. You still have 0 hit points and you're still unconscious. However, you're no longer bleeding out. I will get a little bit more into the death mechanic in a later video. Now, successes. If you do 3 failures, if you get 3 failures before you get 3 successes, then you actually end up bleeding out and your character is now deceased. And it will only take high level magic to essentially bring you back. No amount of medicine will bring you back. You are officially flatlined. They've already called the time of death on you. So unless you have some powerful magic, your character is now gone, unfortunately. Your attacks and spell casting. This is where you're going to put your primary attacks. So if you have a primary spell that you use that's like a cantrip, you're going to be putting that there. If you have if you're using a longbow or a greatsword, some type of battle axe, or whatever weapon of mass destruction your character concocted, you are going to be putting that there. You're going to put the attack bonus and the damage. So this is just a quick cheat sheet for faster combat. You have a million things you can do during combat for certain classes, but if you just have one primary attack or even a secondary attack, that's where you're going to put it, just for quick reference. Below that is going to be your equipment. Almost like this cheat sheet for your equipment, that's going to be your primary equipped like armor, weapons, jewelry, and you can put a little note on the side. However, you're going to need a much bigger spot for your full inventory, and even sometimes equipment, so I like to use the back of the character sheet for that. And those little bubbles to the left on the equipment, that is your currency. And you're gonna basically just write in whatever the DM feels generous enough to give you. To the left of that, you're gonna see your proficiencies and languages. What languages do your characters speak? What type of proficiencies do they have? Are they proficient in heavy armor? Are they proficient in shields? You're gonna put all of that down here. So if the DM says, hey, are you proficient in that? You can just look down and say, yes, I am, or no, I'm not. All the way to the right side, you're gonna see personalities, ideals, bonds, and flaws. Pretty much this is just for role-playing aspect. How many times this will come up in your actual session, it depends on the DM and the session, but this is just all stuff that you can, pretty much that comes from your backstory, you put in there. And you just put, you know, in case if the DM says, hey, aren't you afraid of the dark? Well, that's what you could put in flaws. So instead of just thinking of something on the spot, you can actually look on the face of your character sheet and have any answer ready for your DM. Underneath that, you have features and traits. This list gets very, very long. So generally, I'll have a second sheet of paper ready to put all your features and traits on there. I just like to put the title of the feature or the trait, and then sometimes like an abbreviated description of what it does, just so almost like a quick cheat sheet, if you will. But if you want the full description of it, it will be on the other piece of paper. And that is the gist of the character sheet. Like I said, it's pretty complex when you first look at it. Once you start, after your first few sessions, you get very comfortable with it. I'm really hoping that this video helped you guys out, because I do know a few people that did want to get into D&D, but they look at the character sheet and they're like, no, there's no way. Now, the 5th edition character sheet, for anyone who played previous editions of Dungeons & Dragons, if you remember the 2nd edition character sheet, which was essentially a book, this character sheet is much more simple and it looks a lot more user-friendly. But if you've never been into any other edition of D&D or a tabletop role-playing game, this might look complex to you. But don't worry, we are here to help you through it. But that is going to wrap up this video, folks. And let me know in the comment section below if you have any other questions about D&D or the character sheet, or if you want me to make up another video, what aspect of D&D or just tabletop role-playing games in general confuses you. But until next time, stay tuned and stay nerdy, friends.